Welcome to Perspective and Potential, where we uncover new ways to see the world and tap into the incredible potential within each of us. I'm Abigail Strait, joined by my co-host and mother, Gwen Fund. Together, we'll explore ideas, stories, and strategies designed to help you grow, shift your perspective, and embrace a more complete version of yourself. Whether you're ready for a big transformation or simply curious about the small steps you can take today, our goal is to inspire, encourage, and support you on your journey. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can check us out at perspectiveandpotential.com. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in and see where a new perspective might take you. Welcome back to Perspective and Potential. Today, we're diving into the concept of relationships, what they are, how they shape our lives, and what makes them thrive or break down. Whether it's a romantic partnership or a casual acquaintance, a tight-knit friend group, family dynamics, workplace connections, or even a mentor-mentee bond, relationships are at the core of how we interact with the world. But what truly defines a healthy relationship, and what factors can strengthen or strain these connections? We're going to explore all of that and more, breaking down the key elements that make relationships meaningful, fulfilling, and sustainable. So let's get into it. To start, let's think about this. What exactly is a relationship? We often use that word, I think, pretty loosely. So, what does it actually mean?
Well, if we want to go by Google's definition, it's a noun, and it simply means the way in which two or more concepts, objects, or people are connected, or the state of being connected. And since our focus is mostly on human relationships today, let's start out with the Greek types of loving relationships. The first one they said was eros, which is that sexual or passionate. I really believe that's more of a passion than a real love. The second one is philia, means that brotherly love, that love of friends and family. Usually these are people that we have shared memories and shared values with. And the third one, we don't hear too much about this one, but I think this is probably one of the key and most important kinds of love relationships that we have. And that is the love of parents for their children. And this kind of love comprises a willingness to protect and sacrifice your personal desires for the good of the other. It's really a higher commitment than philia. And then the highest form of love, of course, is agape, which is spiritual, godlike love. It's unconditional and ever present. And then we have St. Augustine, who used the Latin phrase oris amoris to describe how to love others in a way that is appropriate to the relationship. And it seems to be based in circles that are kind of in proportion to the responsibility that we have for each other. So it produces kind of a hierarchy of family first, neighbors, community, and etc. And of course, this is exemplified in the New Testament in 1 Timothy 5:8. But if any provide not for his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel.
That's really interesting to hear, how I think these relationships have been defined, and we're talking like in ancient parts of the world's history. But they don't cover every type of relationship. We have, for instance, we have other relationships that don't fit into those definitions exactly. So when we consider our coworkers, are they a part of our inner circle, or what about people that we just interact with regularly, like a cashier or a neighbor?
Well, you're right. We do have many relationships that don't fit into any of those categories. For instance, we might work with someone without actually considering them a friend, or maybe we're part of a social group like a church or a club of some kind. We can get along with everybody without necessarily having close, loving relationships. Our superiors at work or the cashiers at the store where we shop, again, may not fit into any of those loving relationship models. Unless, of course, we've truly developed agape within ourselves. But I don't think there's too many of those types around. So, unfortunately, many of our relationships have little, if anything, to do with love. We seem to have an abundance of dysfunctional families who find holiday get togethers to be painful, emotional battlefields. And workplaces can become seedbeds of competition and rivalry. Mental health problems can create difficult relationships. Of course, there's always traffic and road rage, and the list can go on and on. And then, of course, there are other relationships like teaching and counseling that have very strict ethical guidelines for mentoring others. Doctors and lawyers have a certain privilege with their clients that creates a very unique relationship style as well.
I'm glad you brought those up because I want to talk about that maybe for just a minute. What about those relationships that do have specific boundaries, like a mentorship, or those that are dictated by strict ethics, such as the doctor patient or lawyer client relationship? How do those fit in? And it seems like the list continues to grow when we talk about the word relationship. Now there can be so many. So, how do those fit in?
Well, I once had a client say to me, "Oh, I am so glad we're friends." But I had to remind her that I was her counselor and that our relationship was somewhat different than a friendship. Um, you know, my relationship with her was pretty much one-sided as it needed to be. As a counselor or a mentor, we need to be proficient in good relationship skills, but these relationships really are mostly one-sided, with the professional being the guardian of sensitive information that's shared by the other party. And that responsibility lies with the professional to protect the other party from harm. And the professional is the one who must set and keep proper boundaries with the other party. It can be very easy for a client or a mentee to start to feel connected to a counselor or their mentor and mistake that connection for a different kind of relationship like friendship or even romantic love. But in every ethics class I took while working with Child and Family Services, um, we were cautioned and reminded about two things. Number one, don't take the child home with you, no matter how bad the home looks. And number two, don't date your clients. The professional holds those very important responsibilities, and they cannot be relegated to the other party. We have to stay in charge of our own emotions and maintain those ethical standards that protect not only us, but those that we serve.
Wow. I'm so glad you said that. And I mean, I think those should seem like some obvious things in an ethics class to go over, but our emotions, I love what you said about how we have to stay in charge of our own emotions. That's so important. I also think it's important for us to look at the very different types of relationships that we're in and be aware of our interactions because I think there's this temptation sometimes, where, whether it's in the case of a client to, their counselor or even an employee with their supervisor to say, hey, we're friends. And when we blur the type of relationship, don't you think, I mean, can't that make it difficult for us to be able to carry on the relationship in the way that it was intended to be?
Exactly. Like I said, it has to be kind of a one-sided relationship. Um, so like with my client, I told her, I said, "You've shared a lot of tender things with me, but what do you know about my life?" And there was an aha moment there for her that she could see the one-sidedness of the relationship that we had. Now that didn't, diminish the fact that I was there for her and I would do everything I could for her. But it definitely exemplified the one-sidedness. So I think we get into trouble if we could take an example like of a supervisor and an employee. Um, so if they blur the lines between that relationship, the supervisor and the employee are starting, to be more intimate in their relationships with one another, and it does get to be this two-sided relationship. Now in the future, if a promotion is available and the employee thinks they've got a shoe in for this promotion because they're friends with the supervisor, um, or if the supervisor picks somebody who is more qualified, that can really damage the friendship that and the relationship that they had. Or on the other hand, if the supervisor does pick the friend over somebody who was more qualified, that can create this uh, combative thing in the workplace that we talked about. So it's, it just creates all these issues that can really impact the relationship down the line.
I think another example that comes to my mind is maybe we have a relationship outside of another relationship, right? So if when I was a principal for a school, I'm also a parent. And so my kids had friends that, wanted to hang out outside of school hours. And I think what we're talking about is also the ability to wear the different hats at the appropriate times so that you can, like we talked about, maintain control over those emotions and conduct ourselves. Really, I think it comes down to that: conduct ourselves in the appropriate ways, depending on what relationship we're acting in. So not to confuse, just because I know this person outside of a principal to parent relationship, I need to just conduct myself a certain way when I am acting the role of principal, so to speak. And I think that overall, if we're intentional about how we look at our relationships, that actually helps us maintain healthy relationships overall, and then we're less likely to confuse closeness with stability.
Right. And in the case like what you were talking about, it's more about respect because if if you and the other party both realize that you're carrying on two different relationships, and the employee can realize that when she's at work or he's at work, that this person is the supervisor and not the soccer mom,
Mhm.
you know. Um, but again, it's our responsibility to put those boundaries and maintain them. It's not the other person's.
So let's get into what makes a relationship healthy then versus unhealthy. Let me do that one more time. So let's get into what makes a relationship healthy versus unhealthy. What are the core elements that define a relationship's quality?
Well, there's some specialists out there, some really smart people, and David Rico, who is an author and psychotherapist, he's come up with this little list of the 5 A's to a healthy relationship. The first A is attention, being present, actively listening to one another, because attention really is the food of any relationship. And in our society now, we're seeing a lot of detriments to that attention, like with our phones, being self-absorbed, or being into the video game or the movie or whatever, and not really paying attention to those relationships around us. The second A is acceptance. And that means embracing one another for who we really are without trying to manipulate or change each other. The third one is appreciation, and that's really just being able to recognize each other's positive qualities and actions. The fourth A is affection, physical and emotional warmth, kind words, thoughtful gestures, all those things that, make us feel good. And the fifth A is allowing, giving each other space to be themselves without trying to control each other. Now, Kelly Smith Keller from Mount Marty University came up with a similar list, but these are called the 5 C's. And her first C is commitment, willingness to invest time, effort, and energy into the relationship. Her second C is courtesy, kindness, empathy, and consideration for each other's well being. The third one is a big one, communication, actively listening to one another, also expressing thoughts and feelings honestly and respectfully. The fourth C is compatibility, and that's really how many shared values, interests, and goals you have. And then the last one is also a big one, compromise, being able to find common ground and each making sacrifices to meet each other's needs.
What I love about these lists that you've shared is that it involves that intentionally thinking about other people. And I mean, overall, all of these things are fantastic and they sound great, but what happens if we can step to the side for just a moment? What happens when one or more of these elements is missing from a relationship, or if one person is committed but the other isn't?
Well, I think that's what counseling's all about. We work with people all the time who are having problems with their relationships, and we have to diagnose, if you will, what is not present in their relationship that needs to be, or what is present that shouldn't be, and in the relational troubles that they're experiencing. But if people are willing to take instruction and work at improving those areas, they not only grow as a person, but their relationships can improve and they can also start to grow stronger.
So, and I think what I would invite all of our listeners to do right now is think about, hopefully we've all been able to think about the many different relationships that we have. Um, and what do you think is the most common missing piece or in a struggling relationship? Is it the lack of attention? Is it poor communication? Is it something deeper?
Well, of course, all of the above can impact a relationship, but communication problems, having little or no respect for each other, and trust issues are definitely the hardest ones to overcome. And we will discover and talk more about this in our next episode on marriage relationships.
Okay, so then let's talk about the two key pillars of any relationship: trust and boundaries.
Well, healthy relationships depend on those two very important things, trust and proper boundaries. Because every relationship we have is kind of a balance between these two dynamics. The amount of trust that we have in someone will more than likely be exhibited in the boundaries that we draw between ourselves and that person. So trust really is the glue of any relationship. And where there's deep connections, trust is strong. We can be vulnerable with one another. We share our innermost fears and hopes. But trust is something each person in a relationship must earn. When the 5 A's and the 5 C's are strong in both individuals, boundaries can be almost non existent.
Okay, so what happens though when trust is broken? I think to some degree, um, there's going to be elements of that within many of our relationships. Does it mean that the relationship is over? I don't think necessarily, but if not, then can it be repaired, and how?
Well, I think you're right. I think in almost every relationship, in little or big ways, we can break trust with one another. But where trust is missing or has been compromised, We have to understand that those connections become weaker and the boundaries are going to become stronger, and it's going to increase the distance needed by the individual whose trust has been broken. But now trust can be reestablished by the one who broke the trust. And it's going to happen over time with real repentance, transparency, and changed behavior. But without those changes, that relationship will continue to be impaired and unhealthy for as long as it lasts.
And that makes sense. Um, especially I think in most cases, but what about when people who are not respecting those boundaries? How do we handle those relationships and those situations?
Well, you're right. There absolutely are people who don't respect others' boundaries, and still others who really don't know how to set proper boundaries to be able to maintain some this level of relationship with their family or with friends. But again, if we're having trouble with our relationships, we need to take a look at our own 5 A's and C's to see if they need some work. And then we can look at the other people in our relationship circles and see where they're lacking. And then we have to make some really hard decisions. First, I'd like to interject here that abuse should be a deal breaker. Mental, verbal, emotional, and definitely physical abuse have no place in any type of relationship, whether that's at home, at work, or in a social setting.
I I totally agree. If I go back to what you said about we need to take a look at our own 5 A's and 5 C's, I what came to my mind was a situation I was in when I was an undergraduate and I needed to take another elective. So I just looked at the course catalog and what was available. And this one course seemed to fit in with the schedule, and it was marriage and family relationships. So I took the course, and of course, there's always required reading. And one of the books was titled How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk. And I'll be honest, I was a little apprehensive just having this book laying around my house. My computer was downstairs for some context, and so I regularly would have my school books just stacked there, and anybody who could come in. And I thought, oh man, what are they going to think, about this literature that I'm reading? But here's kind of the funny twist of that. Um, the more I read about, in this book, there was this theme that our culture had this focus on romantic idealism, that romance is natural, organic, and it doesn't take any work and it just happens. And I was very young and probably within the first 5 or 6 years of my marriage, and I realized in some ways I felt like I was the jerk. The more I read that book, I thought, oh my gosh, I am not intentionally looking at those 5 A's, those 5 C's that we talked about, in what I can bring to the relationship. I think that happens a lot, especially with romantic relationships, is what is this person, what is this relationship offering me? So if we can shift our perspective and change our mindset to ask ourselves, what can we do? Or when a relationship isn't working, what do we do then?
Well, that is where we have to ask ourselves some really hard questions. And here's some of the questions. Can the relationship continue with some proper boundaries put in place? And what boundaries would those be? And which of the relationship essentials is in need of enhancement in which person? Are both people in agreement and willing to work on the relationship? And are there children involved that require us to maintain some level of connection? So if one or more of the 5 A's and C's are absent in one participant in the relationship, and that person is unwilling to make positive adjustments to salvage the relationship, it probably is doomed to perish, because eventually the one who's trying to maintain the relationship will become exhausted and disillusioned and search for what they need elsewhere. Or in the case of shared custody of children in a volatile divorce, those boundaries might have to include a third party to enforce correct boundaries for the benefit of the child. Now, in close, I'd like to note that it's, as individuals, we all come into our relationships in different ways, depending on our personalities, introverts, extroverts, and our life experiences. We can either be very independent or in varying styles of dependency. This opens up that whole other variable in our relationship dynamics. We can have two independent personalities. Now, if they have a healthy relationship, that means they can be interdependent, whereas they're willing to share control and decisions and all of that, versus a combative two independent relationship where they both want to be in control. We also can have two dependent personalities where they both sit around and wait for the other one to initiate control of the situation. And then the one I think we see most often in counseling is the one independent person and a dependent personality. This is where we find codependence. We find enabling of one or controlling of one in order to, have the other party feel like, they have value. So,
I think those are really important things for us to just consider and look at, the different types of relationships that we have. And again, reflect on the intentional decisions we can make in developing and cultivating healthy relationships. As we come to a close, let's pinpoint then the most crucial points from our talk and consider how they apply in our daily lives. So, first, do a self evaluation of those 5 A's and C's and be willing to ask yourself, well, where can I improve? Remember that healthy relationships require effort, communication, and mutual respect. They thrive on trust, but they also need proper boundaries. If a relationship isn't working, then we need to be honest about whether it can be repaired or maintained with proper boundaries, or if it is time to let go. At the end of the day, the key to strong relationships is self awareness and intentionality. Are we showing up in our relationships in a way that fosters trust, respect, and connection? If not, what can we do to change that? And if a relationship is draining more than it's giving, can better boundaries make it functional? Or is it a relationship worth keeping? In our next episode, we are going to explore the topic of marriage, love, and partnership. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts or suggestions for topics for future episodes through our website or through social media. Your input helps us shape the conversation and makes perspective and potential even more impactful. We're Gwen and Abby, and you've been listening to Perspective and Potential. Until next time, keep exploring new perspectives, and remember that every small change can lead to something big. Food for thought.
bon appetit.